Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our first front yard meeting of the year. Our speaker today is David Parks of Camellia Nursery in Carrboro. Camellia Nursery, those of you who don't know, was founded in 1977 by David's mother, Camellia Parks. It's a nursery that specializes in plants from Asia, primarily camellias and small shrubs and trees. David has a BA degree in biology from Reed College in Portland, Oregon. He has a master's degree in botany from the University of Washington in Seattle. David has worked at Camellia since 1994 and has made several collecting trips to China with his father and others, collecting camellias and other plants. He's here today to talk about plant collecting, camellia collecting in China. Please welcome David Parks.
Well, thank you, and thank you, Bobby, for inviting me. I'm honored to be here speaking, so my talk is I kind of limited myself to talking about collecting in kind of Western China, collecting some of the species of camellias in section Camellia. The genus Camellias is divided into about 12 sections. In this section, section Camellia includes Japonicas, the Reticulatas, these real showy, large flowered ones. So it's you can see on the handout, I've kind of outlined the areas where we collected. Well, just talk about this plant. This is a ancient camellia at a monastery or near Lijiang, and this is supposedly 300 years old, and it's called the Camellia of 10,000 flowers. Actually, it's a lot taller and has a lot of flowers, but it got cut off in this photo. I wanted to show the trunk. And supposedly during the Cultural Revolution, the monks chained themselves to this tree so that the Red Guard wouldn't come and destroy it. But it's kind of a tourist attraction. You go there and they have some of the native people, what are they called? I don't remember their nationality. They have these nationalities in China. They're a little bit different than the Han Chinese. And they're dressed up, and you can take pictures with them. And it was hard to get a picture of just the tree because there was so many people there.
Is that a Japonica?
This is a Camellia Reticulata, and probably a selection. You can see the flowers are double. They're not just the wild type single flowers. So, and these have been cultivated for a long time in this area. So I want to, first I'll show you a few of the range of what we were looking at. This is Camellia Reticulata. This is like a wild type, what we found in the wild. Single rose red flowers, big plants. They were generally growing as understory in a broadleaf evergreen forest.
Do they grow here?
They're not real hardy, but probably they would not survive our cold swims. And then this Camellia Magnaflora is, from the eastern part. This is kind of as far east into eastern part of Hunan, and I call it Magnaflora on the. I use these different species names in the program, but it's really one in this group of species that are related to Camellia petardii, var petardii. So that's real large, showy flowers. They have nurseries that are starting to produce this in China because they think it's going to be something that's worth selling. And part of the reason we went to this area is in the last couple decades, they've named over 40 species, mostly by a Professor Chang, who we think sits in his herbarium, and people bring him specimens, just a single branch with a flower, and he looks at them and looks at different traits, things like size, leaf size, flower size, but then also little things like hairs on the anther, on the stamens, and things like that. And he finds little differences and names them up. They all get different species names. Supposedly there was, I don't know if it's true or not, but you get a bonus when you name a species in China. So, so that's Camellia Waliensis. On this one, it's southern Sichuan near Yunnan. Notice on this one the red anthers. When the flower is just starting to open, you'll see the anthers are just bright red. When the pollen's released, they turn yellow. But, that was one trait we think is important. Then, also in Sichuan is I'm calling it Camellia Reticulata, subspecies minor. Real small flowers, but a true red flower, red color, redder than the Camellia Reticulatas. And it also, some of the chromosomes have been counted, and these are tetraploid. And again, the ploidy level, it goes all over. There's diploids, tetraploids, hexaploids, and it doesn't really make a lot of sense all the time either. But it's just another trait that we can use to distinguish some of these. And then Camellia Tanganyika, that's showing, this one shows the range of color. This is a pure white form. The Tanganyika is generally white and real pale pink. So it's a real interesting mix of things. And I'll tell you now, we haven't figured it out. I think it's going to be real hard to figure out just because of the variation that we see. In the flora of China, there's another Chinese professor. He's a lumper, and he's basically put all these things I'm going to show you into 3 species. So I don't think that's the solution either. So traveling around in China, on most of these trips, we were a group. My dad organized these, and I just kind of went along. It was kind of vacation for me to travel around looking for camellias. And we'd find other plants and do some sightseeing, but mostly it was the populations of camellias are found in less disturbed areas generally, and we'd spend a lot of time driving from place to place, and a little time looking for the camellias in sites that were known collecting sites. So we had a little minibus, and we'd drive through the countryside and see lots of these little plots of vegetables. When you drive around the countryside, what you see in China is all the arable land is cultivated. It's all, every little bit, they're planting some cabbages and greens, or along the roadside, between the edge of the road and the ditch, they'll have a few cabbage plants stuck in there. So I enjoyed just seeing the landscape, how it's different from us. I always thought, when I'm driving on our freeways with these big expanses of the cloverleaf, all this green grass, should all be planted with vegetables. But, so we usually had guides that took us around, and they liked to show us their old specimens. These are some ancient reticulatas that they're named. It's this one here that's a named cultivar. They were saying it was 500 years old. This plant didn't look that old, but they could mean that the variety is that old. It's been cultivated and they've propagated it. They do grafting. I was amazed. One place, we were out in the country, and by this farmhouse was this big persimmon tree. Someone climbed up like 20 feet and top grafted this persimmon. So the grafts, that kind of horticulture is common. This kind of grafting is not something that's unusual. So this one was could have been a wild one. It was kind of at an edge of a farmer's field that was kind of protected. They were kind of preserving it. So this is one trip. So this is my dad, Clifford Parks, and Zhao is a graduate student, and she was a graduate student, and Barbara Thacker, those were graduate students. They were working on camellias at that time. And then we had Ron Rabideau from Rare Fine Nursery. He was just along looking for rhododendrons, and a couple guys from Tomas, from Longwood Gardens, and Tim was from Huntington Gardens in California. He's kind of a camellia guy. So we usually had a group, we all looking for, most of us interested in camellias, but other plants too. Now, when we actually got in the field, I think this picture really shows what was made something for us very clear. You can see these are all just one population. These were all in one small area. You know, we probably picked all these flowers in 30 minutes. And you can see there's so much variation. You know, small flowers, big flowers, range of colors, from pinks, to deep reds. And we didn't, have time to look, but probably if we looked at the hairs on the stamens, some of these probably had hairs halfway up the stamens. Others might have had only a few hairs at the base. So there's all this variation. And if you took a branch from this plant, took it to herbarium, pressed it, took this one, and you go and look at those separately in herbarium, without looking at the population, you say, these are different species. There's, distinct differences. But when you go out in the population, you see there's just a whole range of variation. And out in the field, these aren't all different species. They couldn't be. They're all growing together. It's a whole gradation. So, that kind of explained why there were so many species being named. But it didn't solve the whole problem, but, it kind of gave us some idea of what was going on. And this is a diploid retic. So this has 2 copies of the chromosomes. Morphologically, the plant's not different from the hexaploid, which is what is more commonly known. Then also at this site, these are rhododendrons. And they look like hybrids to us. There's Rhododendron unionensis is a white-flowered plant with flowers similar to these, but white. And then there's a species, Rhododendron spinuliferum, which we call the lipstick rhododendron, because the flowers are just tubular. They don't open up. The petals stay closed, which is a red, orange-red. But then we found these. See, that one is, the flower is kind of narrow. It's not opening up. And these are all pink, so it looked like a hybrid to us. So it was just, something interesting. So you see things like that. Often the Rhododendron spinuliferum was growing with these camellias. We saw lots of it. So that's a close-up of the diploid Camellia Reticulata. Again, the rose red flower. Not a true red, but strong colors usually. That's compared with, this is the hexaploid Camellia Reticulata. You can see, this was taken, that was, in the wild, so the flowers kind of beat up. But flowers very similar. This was in the greenhouse. So I took that Thursday. It was going to be in the greenhouse. Let me go back. And usually the Camellia Reticulata was growing, the site was not very high elevation, but understory, broadleaf evergreen forest. Then, okay, this Camellia Magna is, it seems to be related to Camellia Reticulata, but it's a tetraploid. So it's another ploidy level, which is kind of confusing, but also a real dark red, real true red flowers, which was another distinguishing thing from the reticulatas. And it was growing. We found it on these sunny, dry hillsides, overlooking some of these cultivated valleys. So it's a little bit different habitat than the reticulatas. So that was, well, this is in the greenhouse. It was quite real showy plant. Again, a bright red. There were other species that were named in that area. They were also tetraploids, a similar bright red color, and we kind of assume they're tetraploid. that's another thing. It would be nice to go in and get a lot of samples and see if there's variation in the ploidy level. It wouldn't be that difficult because if we had access to a flow cytometer, you can count chromosomes pretty easily, not too expensively. But again, it's right now my dad's mostly doing this just at his kitchen table, measuring, doing morphology, because you can do that without a lot of expense. And we've brought back some samples that we grow here in greenhouses. So, and we were always excited to see fruits. I was excited because that means there might be some viable seeds, and seeds were the easiest way to bring plants back. Almost the only way to reliably bring back germplasm.
That almost looks edible already.
Well, oops. Well, it's these. The outside's a thick husk on camellias, but then there's big seeds inside, and the seeds are edible. They're used. They press oil out of them, and maybe not so much with this species, but other species they use a lot of oil for cooking mostly. But also, when we found fruits, it was important traits that we wanted to see, because that was also something that would tell us something. These have these funny brown, they end up being brownish, call it furfuraceous, where there's this, seems like a layer under the epidermis grows, and the outside epidermis layer ends up kind of balling up into these little brown dots and falling off. So what happens is when the ovary is just developing, it's real hairy, but then after, this is probably not mature, but when it matures, after this layer peels off, you end up with a non-hairy fruit. So it's just another trait that we look for.
David, how large is that?
Camellia Reticulata fruits are probably a quarter to a $1/2 size. So that's, and then, well, I mentioned this one before, Reticulata subspecies minor. This is another tetraploid, but real small flowers. And that was something that within the population it would tend to hold. They would all be small flowers, bright red, probably tetraploid. I don't know if, I think some have been tested, so. So we would find the population, so we'd have to get in the van and drive to another place. And often what it was, we were kind of driving from one mountain to the next. This area is real mountainous, not necessarily really high mountains, but there would be mountains and then valleys in between. So if we'd be collecting on a mountain, and then we'd have to drive down these windy roads, and sometimes we got delayed. I had to wait for the livestock to move. But for me, it was the vacation. Just enjoy the something different. I think some of the other people kind of got anxious because these people, they didn't want to move out of the way. They just seemed to keep going down the hill. driver would start honking the horns, and eventually they would kind of move to the side. But
Dave,
yeah, and you can see it was this area, and down in the valleys, it was winter, it would be very dry. Summers, that part of Yunnan, the summers are wet, winters were dry, and you can see it looked pretty dry here. You know, goats were eating things too. So so going to another, this is kind of another group. This, the Camellia Unnanicas these were probably one of the most spectacular groups we saw. And again, in Sichuan, again, a huge amount of variation. These were just one population. This one was in this kind of this little ravine. They were the biggest shrubs there. I think there was a lot of harvesting of firewood, but the locals seemed to be leaving the camellias. I'm not sure why, but there weren't like big trees, which you would expect in this area, but these were pretty much out in the open, growing among the rocks. And again, you can see the color range, you know, real dark pinks to almost whites, a little bit of pink at the edge of the petals, a lot of variation in size. The foliage tended to be similar to the Camellia petardii unnanicas or Camellia reticulatas. The leaves weren't a good distinguishing character. They were all fairly similar size. But so yeah, again, you can see we just hit it right. They were in full bloom, really showy plants. You know, you could name a dozen cultivars if you could bring back material. Just they were just amazing. Well, that was just a close up of the flower. And the Borrelia unnanica was closest to the petardii unnanica. You can see again the red anthers. That was the red anthers. In this group, we saw a few plants with the red anthers, but then in the petardii unnanicas, almost all of them would have the red anthers. But petardii unnanica was generally a very pale pink flower. It was almost like, if you looked at it, the petardii unnanica was pale pink, and then Borrelia unnanica varied from pale pink to darker pink, almost getting towards the Camellia Reticulata color. So that's another one showing the red anthers. And it was at that site. We had lunch with these people. One of these guys, I don't know which guy. One of these is the mayor of this little village. And what happens is our host has to contact the mayor or whoever's kind of in charge of that area, and kind of get permission, and then they all kind of take us around, and then you have to have a meal with them. And this was pretty much out in the country, so there weren't restaurants. So we were in the mayor's house. We went in and we saw this little suckling, well, not suckling, but a small pig that they took off and slaughtered, and they cooked it while we were waiting. And then we had a, pig soup in this guy's, it was in his house. It was kind of bad because we were waiting and we had to watch. He had a big screen TV and pretty much no furniture. So we had to wait. We couldn't really talk to him. We really wanted to be out looking at those camellias. But you have to do these things in China.
They're very well dressed.
Yes. And I guess maybe not for us, but if our host wanted to come back here, that's something. He has to do this so that the next time he'll be able to do it. So we did have to. Seemed like we were wasting time.
David, when were you there? Is this multiple trips? Is this one trip?
This is multiple trips.
What's the time frame for early?
A lot of this came from a 2000 trip. That was February when we went. We've also gone like November. I think we did 2006 we did a trip too. So again, eating food was a big thing. Almost every night we'd have a big, not really a banquet because it wasn't always necessarily a fancy restaurant, but we'd have a big meal with local people, the mayor of these little villages, or some sort of important person, I guess. And this was Sichuan, so there was lots of this xanthoxylum. Now xanthoxylum is a spice. It's used as a spice there, and that was the spice they used before they had chili peppers. And it's this weird thing. It kind of numbs your mouth and is spicy at the same time. And they love this stuff. Sometimes the meal will be, you'd recognize these little round spheres, and it seemed like half the food was these things, which they're just hard, dry things. And sometimes it was too much. A little bit was okay, but it's an acquired taste. But they use lots of chilies and lots of this xanthoxylum. But again, you had to go to these meals and.
Are the little red things chili?
Those are chilies, yeah. So, but I mean, I enjoyed the food mostly. It was a little too spicy for me, but some people, all they wanted was white rice. And also the Chinese, our hosts, also wanted to get a little points with some other people. So we'd have these celebrations. Every time I've gone there, we've always had some sort of celebration, or at some function I have to, not necessarily me. This is actually not, whoops. It's not me here. That's my dad. But they want him to talk or say something. And here they were starting this new camellia park, and they were carving it out of the cliffside with giant excavators. And, I think they kind of rushed to plant a few things before we got there, but they were planting. They had these big. They grow big stuff. They like to have an immediate garden, and they were planting big camellias. They had, so that was. So we always have to do this kind of thing. But, going up this road in a sedan. We almost didn't make it because it was rainy and muddy. So this is in western Hunan. Zhangxijie is a national park where they have these karst formations, and it was the location where they filmed part of the movie Avatar. Unfortunately, it was kind of hazy, so I couldn't see the mountains that float in the air. In the movie, they had these mountains that were just floating. But I couldn't see those. Anyway, that was a spectacular area, and here Robert McIntosh was asking if we walked much. It didn't seem like the Chinese liked to walk, but this one, they had a chairlift that went from the valley floor up to the top level of these rocks. So we took the chairlift up there and then walked the trail down, which was real interesting. This area, because it was a park and had been preserved, it wasn't that disturbed. There were big trees. This park, they had big Eminopterus, big tuna, they had Davidia. So the forest was quite interesting. They also had these big monkeys, and that's the Camellia Tanganyika, which is part of that Camellia petardii group, was in this park. So that was there was also Camellia oleifera was growing there, and Camellia cuspidata, which is a small white-flowered one. So there were lots of camellias. Well, once we started finding them, we started seeing them everywhere. So that was, and this Tanganyika in eastern Hunan, you can see is a very pale color, pale white, and it was growing this understory, and this was a mixed hardwood and evergreen forest. And along the trail, what I thought was really funny was they had little signs on Eminopterus. Eminopterus henryi in Latin. And they had some Chinese on the signs. So they labeled these trees. I thought that was funny. But then, so you knew what you were looking at. And it was really pretty spectacular country.
That's stone.
Yeah, that's limestone. This a lot of that part of China is limestone, and you get a lot of these interesting rock formations. So here's a Camellia Tanganyika. This is a pure white form. And what was interesting, we found out these are fragrant. Now, you probably know that most camellias don't have much fragrance, but this has a real nice fragrance. And that, in the Camellia petardii that we had in cultivation, there's no fragrance. So that was an interesting trait. And people have started to use this for breeding for fragrance. And then here's the Tanganyika fruit. Again, it's furfuraceous. You can see the hairs pretty much have fallen off, but it has this brown, kind of rough form. And these were fairly small fruits, maybe quarter size. But as you go further west into Hunan, you get to what they were calling Camellia Magnaflora, which was a little different. It had this bark was orange, more orange, it was pretty interesting orange bark, more showy than other of that petardii, bar petardii group. And the flower on this is a deeper pink, quite large. It can be 4 to 5 inches across. And again, this one was being promoted as a possible nursery plant. I'll show you a picture about the nursery later. And you can see on this one, the flowers are really, quite large. See, there's the camera. So some of these fruits were about 3 inches in diameter. But again, this was in this Camellia petardii, var petardii group. In the eastern end of the range, you'd have these big fruits, big flowers. Leaves were a little bigger too. And then as you kind of traveled west, the fruits got smaller, the flowers got smaller, and the color would become paler. But it seemed like a gradation. It wasn't. If you find intermediate, you'd find intermediate populations. It wasn't. So you make an artificial line and divide them up into 2 species, or is it just one big species? And part of this may be caused by the geography. You've got mountain ranges that are separated by valleys, so your populations are being isolated, at least somewhat, because the camellias don't grow down in these dry valleys. They're always up in the mountains. So they wanted us to take us to this nursery where they were growing the Camellia Magnafloras, which the way they grow them, since they want huge plants to sell, they want people, the Chinese, they like to have 10-foot tall plants or a full-size tree when they do landscaping. So it was an old Camellia oleifera plantation. In this area, they were growing a lot of Camellia oleifera for the oil production. And what they were doing, going to the oleifera's, they would have, oleifera's would be trees, with big trunks, all these branches, then go and graft these things out in the field. So we took this boat we took this boat across the river to get to this nursery. I guess there was a road, but this was easier or something. But that was interesting. We just all got in the boat, got down, sat down under this protection. We ate some sunflower seeds, and then on the other side we hop out. But that was this nursery. It wasn't small. This was acres and acres of oleifera's that were being grafted for production. Part of this nursery, they also were growing Camellia oleifera, and it's a very important crop in that area. And they actually graft these little seedlings. They have 20 or 30 selections of oleifera they've selected for oil quality and oil production. So there's a few camellias there. They're in these little kind of cloth, kind of like an ellie pot. It's like almost like a peat pot. They sprout the seed and then do a graft on those little tiny things. So that was, yes, that was, they do things on a big scale there. It's just amazing. But back to the Camellia petardii, var petardii, that group, which includes the Magnaflora, which is a deep pink, and the Tanganyika, which is lighter pink. You go even further east. This is in around Chongqing, which is kind of the little bit east of its Chongqing. They separated from Sichuan. It's kind of its own city, province kind of thing. In that area, there was a park. This was a shrine or something, but it was a protected area, and it was one of the few places where I saw these huge camellias that hadn't been, chopped down and were regrowing. But you can see there was some people carving their names in the trees. But this was the petardii at the eastern end. They had little, almost white flowers. So it's just showing that range of the species. At that park, there was also this giant torreya, Torreya grandis, which I always thought was kind of a understory, small tree, I guess. But there was one. It's had a trunk, probably 2 feet in diameter, and it was 40 or 50 feet tall. So, and they had a little label on it and a fence around it protecting it. So now Guizhou, I'm using these non-camellia ones to kind of transition to a different group. There's Guizhou is a province between Hunan and Yunnan, Sichuan, and that was kind of where all these things kind of overlap, come together. Real poor province. This is pretty mild here. There's probably some frost here. Now we came here, there was supposedly a site here, but again, what happened here, we didn't find any camellias. We walked a little ways in, but we didn't have time. We talked to some of these people in this village, and they said, oh, there's camellias, but it's a 3-hour hike up into these mountains. We really wanted to get up there, but our host said, no, we got to get back, it's going to get dark. And it was actually a nice cement road to this village, so we weren't going to get stuck. But it was they make these cement roads, they're about 10 feet wide, and they go across these fields, they're raised, and then at the edge it just drops off. Just a square block of concrete you drive over. You have to kind of plan ahead if someone's coming from the other direction. Someone's got to wait.
David, is that mist or cold?
These are probably rice. In the summer they would be growing rice here, and those are the rice stalks that they save for their livestock.
Is that mist or coal dust smoke?
It's probably smoke. It was real hazy there. They do burn a lot of coal and see a lot of clear skies there. But getting up to these populations was the problem. Up in these mountains, they're not high, but maybe 1,000 or 2,000 feet above the valleys. You have to get up far enough where it's not disturbed, where they're not cutting for firewood. And you talk to the locals. They knew these plants, and they could tell us where to find them, or sometimes they guide us. Once we had he was a snake catcher. And he took us around carrying a machete the whole time, and because he knew the plants, and his job was collecting snakes and selling them to eat. So that was kind of a problem. There was always never enough time to make a hike up into these hills to find the camellias. But it was kind of hopeful that there are areas that are less disturbed, that these are still growing. So this next group is the Camellia salunensis group. Again, there's been lots of species named in this group. And Glabsipedalo is one we found in Guizhou. This group was often found with Pinus armandi in pretty disturbed areas, very dry sites. It was just a little, it was often just a little low shrub. Although this is probably just a result of being harvested for firewood, and they're regrowing from the stumps. So small leaves, fruits similar again. It has the furfuraceous outside, but small fruits, smaller than a quarter. Flowers. This was in November, and they were just starting to bloom. It tends to bloom late fall into winter. So we'd find plants with both flowers and fruits, that was nice when you could find that. So, and one place we found the plants, but there weren't any buds on them. But then later we were driving along, and there were these women selling bundles of camellia flower buds. They had picked these buds at where they're showing color but not quite open, and made these bundles, and they were selling them to the people driving by. That was kind of disturbing.
What would you do?
I mean, they're just using them as cut flowers, I think. Here's another fruit. So the Glabsipedala, similar to the salunensis, and salunensis was found pretty widely in Yunnan, and often we find it like this was like on the edge of a farmer's field. On these terraces, they make the terraces, and there's kind of a weedy area where the steep part of the terrace is, and sometimes we would find bushes like this. And I guess they seem to leave these a little bit, whether they were able to pick the flowers and sell the flowers for a little bit. I guess they were worth something. But growing out in the full sun, looked real dry.
How did you identify these camellias?
That was often difficult identifying. Some of these, salunensis was easier. They're more distinct than these other ones. Sometimes, we couldn't really tell what they were. Often we'd gone to sites where they had been collected and been identified by Professor Chang, so you'd have a name associated with them.
How are they pollinated? What insects, or how's it done?
I'm not sure in China what's the pollinator. Certainly here, bees go to the camellias. In Japan, the red-flowered ones are bird pollinated. They have a bird similar to a hummingbird that will go to the red-flowered ones. So, but I'm not sure. But another one similar to the salunensis, but slightly different, bigger leaves, is this Camellia valvus. And we were really excited about this one because it grows up near 10,000 feet on the top of this Longjiaoshan, Dragonfoot Mountain. So you can see this was there. You can see it's, well, it's showing cold injury. We were going up there. The bus had to stop because the roads was covered with ice. But that we were interested in because of the cold hardness possibilities. So and it was showy plant. It was growing both on the exposed south side, and this was on the north side. It was a little more protected. There was a few more trees, but heavy blooming, quite showy plant. This is the south side of this peak, where these are it was just camellias growing out in this grassy hillside. This was almost 10,000 feet and totally exposed. From here you could see out across the valley, so the wind was blowing. You could see the goats had been eating the leaves. And if you looked at the base of the plant, you could see they were older camellias which had regrown from the stump. We were guessing this area probably been forested with broadleaf evergreens trees, but it had been cleared, and the trees are not coming back because of the goats, but the camellias, because they regenerate from the stump, are coming back. And that was, you wouldn't think this is where you would plant a camellia, but they were looking pretty good. I mean, the leaves certainly were getting some wind burn, and, so we were really excited about getting this back, using it as a parent in breeding for the cold hardness potential.
Someone has good legs.
Yes, yeah, that was pretty steep there, but we didn't actually have to go very far. It was near the road, and unfortunately, we got this plant. We did get some plants of this back, but it does not like our heat. It succumbs in our summers.
Can you grow japonicas in sun like that?
You can. Around here, it's going to look. They're going to look pretty rough by the end of winter. Putting camellias out in the open there. The combination of the cold and the sun, wind, it'll be hard on the foliage. They could survive. So it's still something, kind of I have in my back of my mind, if I could get some of these plants to grow, or just get some pollen. Again, there was a lot of variation in this population. There are bigger flowers, more pink markings on the petals, but kind of hard to get to. So this was going through one of the valleys lower down. This is a farmer's house. This is some sort of tea. We'd often see Camellia sinensis escaped or native. I don't know. It's hard to tell. But this was probably related to teas, but more of a tree, one of the tree-formed species, which was interesting. But
Were they drinking a lot of the different kinds of camellias, or only the sinensis?
They certainly would use the related species, but not the species we were looking at. There's a few species related Camellia sinensis they do use for tea. So just kind of summarize, I have the handout. It's probably not real clear because I only have three species on there. I should have put species groups. So you can see the petardii, petardii. It's more on the eastern edge, and they include the Magnaflora, the darker pink ones, and then grading into the Tanganyika, lighter pinks, and then petardii, petardii, smaller flowers and very pale. Then the Salunensis, which has, the area is similar to the area where it grows is similar to the Camellia Reticulata group, but it's a different habitat. And those are like the Salunensis, the tenuovalvus. There's was another one, Glabsipedala. That group seemed to be kind of a range of traits within a certain range. Those kind of seem to make a group. And then the Camellia Reticulata, they're probably the most complex because we've got different ploidy levels. We have we call them the red Szechuan tetraploids, which seem fairly distinct. But again, there's always these grading from one to the other. It's not a clear-cut example. And it's not a clear-cut, easy way to distinguish them. So that the reticulatas include the diploid reticulatas, hexaploid reticulatas, and they kind of go towards the Borrelia unanicas, which it's kind of hard to say. But one way to think of it is thinking about some of our plants, say something like sugar maple has huge, well, in our country has a huge range, but also a huge variation. If you compare sugar maples in Vermont compared to some of these varieties, or some people consider them species, it ranges all the way into Florida or even western United States. But it's, again, if you probably looked at it on a population level or the whole range, you'll see this kind of gradation from the traits kind of gradually change. So that's kind of what we're looking at. We didn't really decide anything or make any species designations. We're still just collecting data. So, but then, besides that kind of botanical interest, there's also the horticulture interest. We were able to bring some of these things back. This was one of my dad's seedlings. He crossed the wild retic with one of our cultivated retics and got a real nice big flower. So it's easy to see how the cultivated retics that the Chinese selected over probably centuries, they're not that different from the wild retics. Just by a single cross, we got a nice big kind of semi-double flower. So that's my talk. And if you have any questions, I'll try and answer.
Your dad's both there.
Okay, yes. Yes. This is, my dad wrote a book with a Chinese professor who actually was our guide some of the time. It's in Chinese and English, and it's just kind of a list of different species, and kind of an illustrated guide. My dad, it's not the answer, but it gives you some information, some idea of what's out there. I think in this group, he's got, in this book, he's got maybe a dozen of the species that I've talked about there in the section of Camellia. Doesn't have all 40 of them, so. But, and I have a few copies if you want to buy one. They're $95. And you're welcome to our old catalog if you want. I'm still working on my catalog for the Nursery. So.
I'm going to actually jump in with the questions I often do first. You showed the camellias in that karst topography, which I would guess would be kind of alkaline soil, or surprisingly. I always think camellia is acid soil, so it's not the case. Of course, you weren't probably testing pH.
We were not testing pH, but other areas with these, we'll see camellias growing on limestone, like the yellow camellias down in southern China grow on limestone in the rocks. My dad thinks the actual soil or around the roots is probably not that alkaline. But,
Okay.
that's don't really.
Okay. Mark?
I do have a question, but you go up in Appalachian Mountains and see rhododendron growing on our limestone there, and they for acid soil. But you talked with the retics. You talked a lot about the ploidy. Are they testing the ploidy over there in China? Or are you doing it here, or how's that going? And is there any chromosome counts looking at ease some of the breeding between some of these related plants?
I mean, certainly the Chinese have done some. I don't think my dad has ever done much on these collections. And one of my dad's graduate students from Japan actually has done a lot. But it's, again, something you need to do kind of at the population level, I think. But, yeah, but it's hard to do. Do you have a flow cytometer we can use?
Not ready.
Yeah, yeah.
Any other questions?
For anyone traveling down through Savannah on 95, you need to stop at the USDA experimental garden. It used to be called the Bamboo Garden, but within the last few years they've done an extensive collection of species camellias. And we were down there for Christmas, and there was about 4 or 5 different yellow ones in flower at that time. It's a very small garden, very new, but it's on 17 right at 95, easy to get to.
If you go down there, go down to Armstrong Atlantic University. They're horticulturists there. Phil Schroeder is doing just crazy stuff on that campus. It's amazing. And they're 5 minutes away from the little bamboo farm.
Okay. Now, Ellen?
This whole area from Hunan to Hunan, that's all mountainous?
Pretty much.
Pretty
yeah,
much.
Yeah, more or less. I mean, Hunan, they're not huge mountains. I think they might get up to 6,000 to 8,000 feet. But then like Sichuan, they have 15,000 foot, 20,000. Really big mountains.
And that's where it looks like on this map, the most variation
Yeah.
in the high
Yeah.
mountains.